Megavolt, Rise of the Annihilator. Chapter 1. The lights in the Neo Metropolis power plant flickered ominously as the facility's energy core pulsed with a strange, unearthly glow. Megavolt stood in the shadows, her yellow and black costume blending into the darkness. This was her chance to prove herself as a true hero by taking down the notorious Shadow Stalker alone. Come out wherever you are," she whispered, electricity crackling around her fists. A chilling laugh echoed through the chamber. "So eager to begin our little game, Megavolt." Megavolt whirled around, but saw nothing. "Show yourself, Shadow Stalker. Your thieving days are over." "Such arrogance for one so young," the voice purred. "You'll learn respect soon enough." A swirling vortex of inky darkness suddenly coalesced behind Megavolt. She reacted instantly, firing a bolt of lightning over her shoulder. The blast sizzled through the vortex, dispersing it. "Not bad," said Shadow Stalker, stepping out from behind a generator. She was dressed head to toe in a skin-tight catsuit that seemed to drink in the light around it. "But it will take more than parlor tricks to best me." Megavolt gritted her teeth. She knew she shouldn't have tried to take on such a dangerous enemy alone, but she wanted to prove to the city and to herself that she had what it took to be a hero. That she could step out of the shadow of greats like Volcom. But she had been reckless, and now she was in over her head. "Give up the energy core, and we'll go easy on you," Megavolt bluffed, preparing another electrical barrage. Inside, though, she desperately tried to come up with a plan. She was on her own, with no backup on the way. Failure here could doom the entire city if Shadow Stalker made off with the experimental core. "I think not." Shadow Stalker extended her hands, engulfing Megavolt in inky tendrils. As the darkness wrapped around her, Megavolt let loose her charged attack, filling the chamber with a blinding flash. Chapter 2. On the other side of Neo Metropolis, Bolt sat brooding in his dilapidated penthouse. Gone was the shining palace he once inhabited when he had been the city's champion. These days, only dust and memories occupied its lonely rooms. On a wall hung mementos of his glory days medals, trophies, magazine covers featuring his grinning face. Those honors had seemed so important once. The praise, the fame, the thrill of victory. Back when he thought the city needed him. Bolt sighed, rising from his tattered armchair to stare out the window at the shimmering skyline. Neo Metropolis had moved on without him. New heroes had come forward after his fall from grace, erasing his name from the headlines. The people no longer chanted his name, but he had only himself to blame. His fingers tightened on the windowsill. If only he hadn't been so arrogant, so sure of his own infallibility. His ego had blinded him until it was too late. Lives had been lost because of his mistakes. Good people who had trusted in him. After that, Bolt couldn't bring himself to don his uniform again. The people were right to turn their backs on him. A news report suddenly blared from the penthouse's view screen, jolting Bolt from his regrets. Breaking news: an attack at the Neo Metropolis power plant. Shadow Stalker apprehended trying to steal the experimental energy core. Bolt frowned, watching the live footage of the shadowy thief being led away in restraints. But his eyes were drawn to a younger figure standing triumphantly nearby Megavolt. Bolt huffed, turning away. The media was hailing Megavolt as a rising star after single-handedly taking down the notorious Shadow Stalker. They'd plaster her bright face everywhere, just as they once had with him. Fame was a fickle beast, he knew that now. Megavolt would learn soon enough. Still, something about the cocky grin Megavolt flashed the cameras didn't sit right with him. It was the same look he saw those many years ago, staring back from the mirror. A hunger to be known, to be revered. It was a hollow thing that faded all too quickly. Perhaps he should have a talk with the young hero. Warn her of the perils of pride. Maybe it would help redeem his own fall from grace if he could steer another from his mistakes. Yes, he could become a mentor, guide a new generation so history did not repeat itself. It was time Bolt stopped hiding from who he once was. The city may have forgotten him, but he still had a responsibility. Bolt turned off the news report and headed for the penthouse elevator. For the first time in years, there was purpose in his steps. Megavolt's desire for fame had awakened his own need for redemption. This was his chance to be the hero Neo Metropolis deserved, even if it was from the shadows. Chapter 3. Deep below Neo Metropolis, in a secret bunker hidden far from prying eyes, a council of shadowy figures stood around a glowing orb resting on a plinth. Each was draped in hooded black robes that hid their faces. "Shadow Stalker has failed," said one, their voice a sinister whisper. "All part of the plan," responded another. "The energy core was never our true prize." The orb flickered, energy swirling violently within it. A face suddenly coalesced in its depths, the leering, scarred visage of a man with blazing eyes. "Events are proceeding as I have foreseen," the phantom rasped. "Soon, all the elsewhere shall tremble before the might of Obsidian Hand." The figures around the plinth bowed their heads. "Yes, Lord Annihilus, your will shall be done." Annihilus' face faded from the orb as he returned to the strange dimension where he was exiled. The shadowy council waited silently as another robed figure entered the chamber. "Report," commanded one. The newcomer bowed deeply. "The clone lives, its powers grow stronger with each passing day." "Excellent," whispered another. "Once it reaches maturity, the Annihilator shall be ours to command. None shall stand against Obsidian Hand then." "We must accelerate our plans." Annihilus grows impatient. The robed messenger hesitated. "There is a complication. It seems Bolt has emerged from seclusion." He spoke with the whelp Megavolt after her fluke victory over Shadow Stalker. Angry murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Bolt is weak, washed up. He is no threat to us." One shadowy figure raised a hand for silence. "Do not underestimate him. Bolt's reputation was earned. If he allies with Megavolt, they could both become problematic." The messenger bowed again. "I shall arrange for an accident. Both will meet their end in some tragic mishap." "No." The lead council member turned toward the orb, within which Annihilus' fiery eyes were staring once more. "Let them come. Once the Annihilator is complete, none shall hinder our plans, not even the vaunted Bolt himself. There will be no one left to stand against Obsidian Hand." Sinister laughter echoed through the chamber as Annihilus' baleful gaze looked on in approval. Chapter 4. Megavolt hummed cheerfully as she entered her lair, nestled high atop one of Neo Metropolis' gleaming towers. Swiping a candy bar from the mini fridge, she flopped onto the sofa and clicked on the giant view screen taking up most of the far wall. Predictably, the news was still blaring on about her epic takedown of Shadow Stalker. Megavolt grinned, happy to bask in the limelight. She had definitely proven herself today. Who cared if she was a little reckless going in alone? The point was she had gotten the job done when no other hero could. A renewed surge of electricity coursed through Megavolt's veins at the memory. After her brief struggle, Shadow Stalker had fled into the shadows empty-handed once the energy core's defenses activated. But Megavolt had hurt the infamous thief, she was sure of it. That battle had just been the opening salvo. Now, Megavolt would track Shadow Stalker down and finish the job for good. Munching her candy bar, Megavolt began scanning police reports for any leads. There had to be clues to pick up the trail again. Shadow Stalker was wounded and vulnerable. This was Megavolt's chance to cement her status as Neo Metropolis' new darling hero. She'd succeed where all others failed and unravel the mystique surrounding the shadowy thief once and for all. A few keystrokes unlocked the police database. Megavolt sorted through the latest incident reports, looking for anything tying to her target. Most were small-time robberies, vandalism, a 3-armed mutant tortoise rampaging downtown. That was new. But then something caught Megavolt's eye. A report of strange electrical disturbances in the storm-drain tunnels below the city. Police had investigated but found nothing out of the ordinary. Still, something about it seemed promising. If Shadow Stalker was hurt, she might hole up somewhere secluded to recover, like the remote tunnels. Megavolt quickly cross-referenced old utility schematics against reported malfunctions. A pattern emerged. The issues formed a trail leading deeper into the ancient tunnel network. Her pulse quickened. This had to be Shadow Stalker's trail. Megavolt sprang up, nearly choking on her candy bar. This was it. All she needed to do was follow the path of disturbances, corner the wounded thief in her lair, and promptly slap the cuffs on. With Shadow Stalker's capture under her belt, Megavolt's reputation would be sealed. Neo Metropolis would finally know who its real guardian was. Megavolt rushed to suit up, sparks dancing excitedly around her. In her eagerness, she didn't notice the silent drone monitoring her from the ceiling. Its blinking red light tracked Megavolt's movements, transmitting everything back to its unseen masters. Chapter 5. Shadow Stalker hissed as she applied salve to the electrical burn scarring her shoulder. That impudent brat Megavolt would pay for such insolence. Once Shadow Stalker regained her strength, she would repay the child's arrogance tenfold. But healing quickly was paramount. It was only a matter of time before the superhero pest picked up her trail again. At least Megavolt didn't know the true importance of the experimental core she had stolen. That vault of power was a crucial component in Shadow Stalker's master plan. A plan not even her hidden masters in Obsidian Hand were aware of. The bunker's entrance suddenly exploded in a shower of sparks as a figure came flying through it. Shadow Stalker whirled, shadows coalescing around her hands. She paused upon recognizing the dazed form sprawled on the floor. "Volcom, what are you doing here?" The older hero groaned, picking himself up slowly. Sparks flickered weakly around his fists. "You know why I'm here? I have to stop you before you put the city in danger again." Shadow Stalker scoffed. "You always were a fool blinded by sentiment. I'd have thought being betrayed by your allies would have opened your eyes by now." Volcom's face hardened. "The heroes of this city may have turned from me, but I will still defend the innocent as I have sworn." Admirable, if pointless. Shadow Stalker melted into the darkness, viper-like binds spearing out to ensnare Volcom before he could react. I take no pleasure in this, old friend, but I cannot allow you to interfere again. Volcom struggled against the shadowy bonds slowly tightening around him. I don't know what Obsidian Hand has over you, but this path leads only to ruin. It's not too late to make this right. Shadow Stalker stepped forth from the darkness, a jagged obsidian blade forming in her hand. "Oh Volcom, when will you see that there are no heroes or villains? Only necessity. What I do for the good of this city. You could have stood with me, yet you chose otherwise, and so our paths diverge here." She raised the shadow blade, poised for a lethal stroke. But before it could fall, the bunker shook with a sudden explosion. Shadow Stalker staggered back. Volcom seized the chance and blasted his bindings apart. He turned to the collapsed entrance to see Megavolt standing in the smoking hole. "Release him and surrender, Shadow Stalker," Megavolt demanded, hands aglow with power. "Your terror ends now." Shadow Stalker hissed in fury, dissipating her weapon. "You insufferable little, no matter, I shall let Obsidian Hand teach you respect." Before Megavolt could react, Shadow Stalker melted into the darkness. The bunker rumbled ominously as its hidden self-destruct initiated. "We must flee," Volcom cried. "This whole place is coming down." With a final glare at the pooling shadows, Megavolt took Volcom's hand. They raced back down the tunnel, the collapsing bunker crashing down behind them. Chapter 6. Bolt lounged casually atop a parked hover van, watching as Megavolt emerged from the storm-drained tunnels, half carrying an older, white-bearded hero he recognized as Volcom. An explosion echoed from inside the tunnel, collapsing the entrance in a cloud of dust and debris. Interesting, it seemed Megavolt had picked up Shadow Stalker's trail after all, brazenly pursuing the thief into her own stronghold. Dangerously bold, but the girl had spirit. With some wisdom to temper her recklessness, Megavolt might actually live long enough to become a seasoned hero. Which was exactly what Bolt was here for. With Shadow Stalker temporarily out of the picture, it was time he introduced himself. Bolt dropped silently to the ground, not even stirring a ripple in the puddle he landed in. He called on his Kai, instantly masking his presence from the two electrokinetics. To their senses, he simply blended into the background, utterly unremarkable and unthreatening. Years ago, this city had called him its greatest champion. None could stand against his mastery of self. But that mastery had failed him when it mattered most. Now it was a mere crutch for a fated hero. Bolt watched Megavolt help Volcom to the street corner, where a sleek patrol cruiser sat waiting. His old friend got into the driver's seat, waving the younger hero away. Volcom had always been stubbornly independent, even in his twilight years. Some things never changed. As the cruiser sped off, Bolt stepped forth from the shadows. Megavolt whirled instinctively, hands wreathed in lightning. Impressive reflexes at least. In his prime, Bolt himself could not have reacted faster. He held up his hands disarmingly. "Peace, Megavolt. I've only come to talk." Megavolt stared suspiciously. "Bolt, the Bolt, what do you want?" He smiled. "To offer you guidance. I witnessed how you selflessly rescued Volcom back there, and took down Shadow Stalker before that. You have courage and spirit, if not experience." "Oh yeah?" Megavolt crossed her arms. "And what would a washed-up relic know about heroics nowadays?" Bolt's eye twitched slightly. The arrogance of youth. More than you might imagine, he said evenly. I too once stood where you are now, at the beginning of the path, certain of my own lofty destiny. He activated a holo-projector on his wrist, displaying news footage from decades past. Bolt in his prime, dispatching villains left and right to the roar of adoring crowds. The unstoppable champion. The invincible hero. Bolt switched off the images. There's much I can teach you about containing one's ego and the peril of embracing darkness to fight darkness. You have the potential for great heroism. With wisdom, your spirit could truly illuminate this city instead of burning out like so many flashes in the pan. If you'll let me guide you. Megavolt studied him silently for several moments before answering. You really think you can teach me to be a better hero? Bolt nodded. I know I can, if only so the city does not lose another bright light before its time. He extended his hand. Hesitantly, Megavolt shook it. Okay, Bolt, what's lesson 1? Bolt smiled. By tempering this reckless upstart, perhaps he could still redeem himself as well. Their paths now converged upon the road to heroism. Chapter 7. Obsidian Hand will not let this interference stand unchallenged, a robed figure warned. Agreed, we must accelerate our plans before Bolt and Megavolt uncover them fully, said another. The council of shadowy figures stood around the glowing orb, once more as Annihilus' baleful eyes observed from its depths. Pathetic fools, the phantom sneered. Have you learned nothing from past defeats? I have no use for your overcautious mewling. The lead council members swept into a deep bow. Apologies, Lord Annihilus, we only wish to suggest. Silence. Annihilus thundered. Must I think for all of you? The phantom's fiery gaze turned toward the lead council member, who quailed under the intensity. Implement the contingency, you know which failed asset to unleash. The lead council member hesitated only a moment before bowing again. Of course, Lord Annihilus, your will shall be done. See that it is, Annihilus growled before vanishing back into his shadowy realm. The lead council member gestured to his subordinates. Make preparations to breach Blackgate Penitentiary. We must act swiftly before. A messenger rushed into the chamber, interrupting. Apologies, but troubling news. Bolt has broken into the penitentiary ahead of us. He battles Overload as we speak. What? Impossible. The council members turned to observe the scene unfolding on the viewing orb. Within the maximum security prison, Bolt ducked and wove between massive bursts of red energy, slowly closing in on a hulking figure encased entirely in a high-tech battlesuit. Overload, once the city's most wanted criminal mastermind. His arms had been replaced with energy cannons, and his armor enhanced with the most dangerous technology imaginable. Now, he was unleashing his full arsenal against the lone hero. Your reign of terror ends here, Overload, Bolt declared, deftly avoiding the destructive beams. Overload laughed mechanically. Come to finally put me away for good, Bolt, you'll have to do better than that. Bolt managed to get in close during a barrage, striking a series of precise blows at disabled Overload's cannons. Without his ranged attacks, the villain attempted to grab Bolt, who slipped smoothly away. Why are you here? Overload demanded. I know you didn't come just to gloat. Bolt's expression was grim. No, I'm here to propose a temporary alliance, Obsidian Hand threatens this city. I believe only your knowledge can stop them. Overload barked a harsh laugh. You must be truly desperate if you're turning to me for help. Obsidian Hand can burn for all I care. With Overload's weapons disabled, Bolt now projected authority. I am not asking, Overload. You claim to love this city, now is your chance to prove it. Overload fumed, energy crackling around his armor. But finally he powered down his fist with a growl. Fine, I'll play along for now, Bolt. But when this is over, we go back to being enemies. I'm not turning hero. Bolt nodded. Agreed. Now tell me what you know about Obsidian Hand's endgame. Overload's robotic face was unreadable, but his voice held dark promise. Oh, they have something special planned for Neo Metropolis, all right. The council watched tensely as Bolt and his new uneasy ally coordinated their next move. None noticed the pair of eyes observing it all through a hidden drone. Chapter 8. Megavolt paced anxiously in her lair. Where was Bolt? He had promised to begin her training this morning, but the hours had ticked by with no sign of the older hero. Some mentor he was turning out to be. She glanced over at the police scanner, hoping for any alerts she could respond to herself. But things had been strangely quiet since her confrontation with Shadow Stalker. Almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. It set Megavolt's nerves on edge. With a huff, she flung herself onto the couch and tried watching TV instead. Maybe she was being impatient. Bolt had decades more experience. Obviously he knew best what their next step should be. But the waiting was killing her. She needed action. As Megavolt restlessly channel surfed, a news alert suddenly broke through. She quickly turned up the volume, anticipation rising. Please let it be Bolt summoning her as his new protege at last. Breaking news, the anchorman began. Only hours ago, infamous criminal overlord Overload dramatically escaped custody during a prison transfer. Authorities believe he had help from an unknown accomplice. Megavolt shot upright. Overload free? How is that possible? He had been locked safely away since before she became Megavolt. None could overcome his weaponized armor. Had Bolt gone after the villain alone for some reason? Is that why he never showed? An image flashed up, showing the aftermath of Overload's escape. The convoy transporting him lay in ruins, guards scattered groaning on the ground. Definitely Overload's handiwork. But more interestingly, a familiar figure could be seen entering the facility amidst the chaos. The anchorman confirmed it. Witnesses claim Neo Metropolis vigilante Bolt was present, apparently pursuing Overload inside. His current status is unknown. Megavolt furiously powered down the TV. So that's where Bolt was. Chasing his old villain without even telling his supposed protege. Did he think she would just sit around waiting obediently? Like some hapless sidekick? Oh no, Megavolt growled, lightning sizzling through her braided hair. If Bolt wants to hog the action, then I'll just have to prove myself without him. Let's see how the washed-up old-timer feels when Megavolt brings down Overload first. She threw on her costume and raced out the door, electricity trailing in her wake. Bolt wanted to cut her out. Fine. She would take down Overload herself and show Neo Metropolis its next champion had already arrived. But even as Megavolt stormed off, a shadowy figure watched her intently from the rooftop across the street. Trailing the eager hero from a distance, its orders were clear. Chapter 9. Bolt rubbed his temples wearily as he reviewed schematics and data logs with Overload. They had taken over one of the villains' hidden bunkers to coordinate their search for Obsidian Hand. It was slow and tedious work, sifting through all the intricacies of Overload's weaponized systems, looking for clues. Not the glorious return to action Bolt had envisioned. Overload seemed to share the frustration. This is getting us nowhere. We've combed through every byte of data I have. He slammed a massive fist onto the console, denting the metal. Bolt didn't flinch. There must be something we've overlooked. Some small fragment you picked up in your past dealings with Obsidian Hand, think. With a growled curse, Overload turned away. Bolt sighed inwardly. Tempers were wearing thin, much like the old days. How long could this alliance of necessity last? What I wouldn't give to just hit the streets and bust some laser-masked heads, Overload grumbled. At least that was productive. Bolt's response was weary. Violence is rarely the solution. We're supposed to be reforming here, remember? Once a weapon, always a weapon. Overload flexed his enormous cannon arms. At least I know what I am, Bolt, but look at you clinging to faded glory and lost purpose. Tell me I'm wrong. Bolt stiffened, a retort on his lips. Yet he paused. Overload's words cut deeper than expected. Had Bolt merely been deluding himself since donning a costume again? Chasing the ghost of his past heroism? Perhaps he had been foolish trying to recapture faded glory. His time had passed. Bolt saw that now, looking back at all they had fruitlessly sifted through. This new generation no longer needed him. But the city still did. And Bolt couldn't abandon it, no matter how tarnished his legacy was. He must stand fast against evil like Obsidian Hand. Not for himself, but simply because it was right. Bolt rose suddenly, a fresh gleam in his eye that made Overload pause his grumbling. You're right, old friend, Bolt said simply. I've been clinging to the past, trying desperately to reclaim what's gone. He removed his mask, letting it fall to the floor. But no more. Maybe I'm no longer the hero I once was. Perhaps the world has moved on. And that's okay. He smiled faintly. I will keep fighting to protect this city, not for my legacy, but because others still need that protection. And if an old has-been like me can provide it, then so be it. Overload stared silently. Bolt stood straighter, feeling lighter than he had in years. The revelation crystallized his new path forward. He would stand fast and redeem himself without regrets over past glory or future obscurity. Bolt turned to his gruff ally. Now then, my large friend, let's get back to this data. Any fragment could be the key to protecting Neo Metropolis. Overload seemed taken aback. But finally he nodded and stepped up beside Bolt. Well said, hero. My sensors may have collected something during a past Obsidian Hand theft. I'll transfer the files over. Bolt clasped Overload's armored shoulder, feeling that together they might just turn the tide against evil's rising tide. Chapter 10. Obsidian Hand's inner chambers rumbled with fierce debate. Arguments rang out among the various shadowy council members in the wake of Overload's shocking betrayal. This changes nothing, one insisted. We proceed as planned. Fool, spat another. Overload could expose us completely. We must reset the entire operation immediately. The lead council member watched impassively as accusations flew. None noticed the glow of the viewing orb steadily brightening behind them. "Enough," thundered a voice from its depths. All fell instantly silent as Annihilus' fiery gaze fell upon them. "Your squabbling shames me. Have you learned nothing?" The lead council members swept into a deep bow. "Apologies, Lord Annihilus, we only wish to serve." "Silence," Annihilus hissed. "Overload's betrayal is meaningless. The time of talk has passed. Action is required." The Phantom's eyes burned with fervent intensity. "You know what must be done, for the good of our cause." The lead council member kept his hooded head downcast. "My lord, the weapon. It is not yet mature. We cannot be certain." "Now!" Annihilus roared, his demonic face contorting in the orb. "Activate the Annihilator immediately. Reduce this city to ash so that it may be reborn." The lead council member trembled, but did not protest further. Around him, the other Obsidian Hand members waited uneasily. Finally, their leader rose. "It shall be done, Lord Annihilus." He turned to his subordinates without hesitation. "Alert the Clone Master, begin final energy infusion, and prime the Annihilator for activation." Murmured assents echoed around the chamber as the council members dispersed to follow their instructions. All knew the risks, but none now dared defy Annihilus' commands. The lead council member glanced back as the viewing orb faded to standby mode. They balanced now on a precipice, the city's very future hanging in the balance. But Obsidian Hand's path was clear. "Forgive me, old friend," the lead council member whispered to the silent orb. "But for the dream to survive, sacrifices must be made." He exited swiftly, black robe billowing behind him. Maybe someday, Volcom would understand why his former comrade had to let the darkness in. Why Shadow Stalker had to betray him. But first, the Annihilator must awaken and make ruin. Chapter 11. Megavolt crouched on a rooftop overlooking one of Overload's suspected hideouts. No activity yet, but she was certain the villain would show his face here eventually. And when he did, Megavolt would be ready. But as the hours of fruitless stakeout crawled by, doubts crept in. What if she had guessed wrong? Overload had gone completely dark since his escape. There were no sightings or leads to pursue, despite her constant monitoring of the police bands. Megavolt huffed in frustration. This wasn't how her big solo takedown was supposed to go. She should be trading blows with Overload right now, not wasting time on a useless stakeout. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Megavolt tensed, hands lighting up automatically in anticipation. But it was just a maintenance bot going about its routine. She powered down with a scowl. Full salam again. Patience had never been Megavolt's strong suit. She itched to be back in action after the exhilaration of her victory over Shadow Stalker. Anything was better than just sitting here. Maybe she should give up this useless vigil and take the fight to Obsidian Hand instead. Clearly, they were the real threat here, not the lackeys like Shadow Stalker and Overload. If she could find their hidden base, Megavolt could land the biggest win yet. She nodded firmly to herself. Waiting around reactively would get her nowhere. It was time for direct action. Megavolt would do what Bolt failed to take the fight right to the heart of Obsidian Hand. After she saved the city from their menace, all of Neo Metropolis would finally know Megavolt's name. With renewed purpose, Megavolt began scanning the city for any clue that could lead to the secretive Obsidian Hand. There had to be a trail somewhere. She would find it, no matter what it took. For the briefest moment, Megavolt thought back to Bolt's lessons about patience and measured response. But she shrugged it off. This was her chance to do what her mentor couldn't and claim the glory he once held. Electricity crackled eagerly around Megavolt's fists. The clock was ticking, and soon her time would come. Chapter 12. Bolt slipped silently through the stormed rain, following the tracker he had planted on Megavolt. After her abrupt departure, he had decided keeping tabs on the impulsive young hero was wise, especially with Obsidian Hand potentially targeting her. Sure enough, his caution had proven warranted. Bolt emerged into a large junction chamber, just in time to see Megavolt battling a squad of Obsidian Hand enforcers. She was holding her own, but they kept coming in seemingly endless waves. Bolt moved to intervene, but paused as two more combatants entered the fray. Shadow Stalker and Volcom, locked in their own desperate duel. His two old friends crossed blows with ferocity that spoke of a deeper feud. Old scars that Bolt recognized all too well. He too had once sought to redeem a fallen friend. It was a painful path to walk, but from the anguish on Volcom's face, some hurts ran too deep to heal. Megavolt suddenly cried out as Shadow Stalker landed a direct hit, sending her flying into the tunnel wall. Before the Dark Enforcer could press the advantage, Bolt sprang forth, sweeping her feet out from under her. "Your fight is with me," Bolt declared, helping Megavolt up. "Are you all right?" She winced, wiping a trickle of blood from her lip. "Yeah, I'm fine. Had it under control, though." Bolt smiled wryly. "I'm sure." He turned to face the regrouping Obsidian Hand forces. "Think you can keep these grunts busy? Their masters are the real threat." Megavolt grinned, electricity crackling between her fingers. "With pleasure, go take down Shadow Stalker." As Megavolt threw herself back into the melee, Bolt focused on the shadowy woman, detachedly observing the chaos. Shadows swirled in anticipation around her hands. "So the great Bolt returns to the fray at last," she mused. "Come to play the hero again?" Bolt settled into a fighting stance. "I've come only to stop you and Obsidian Hand from harming this city." Shadow Stalker sighed. "Ever the noble crusader, when will your compassion end?" She extended a hand, shadow dripping between her fingers. "Let me cure you of that tiresome weakness." The darkness came alive, writhing tendrils spearing toward Bolt with lethal intent. He avoided them with an aerial flip, landing behind Shadow Stalker, inside her guard. Before she could react, Bolt struck a carefully placed nerve cluster. Her concentration broke, shadows evaporating. But Shadow Stalker merely laughed, melting backward into the darkness. "Most impressive, hero, but Obsidian Hand's plans are already in motion. You cannot stop the coming fire." With those ominous words, she vanished fully, departing the battle. The remaining enforcers quickly routed under Megavolt's onslaught. An uneasy silence fell over the chamber. Bolt turned to where Volcom leaned against the wall, looking suddenly old and weary. Their eyes met across the chamber, today's battle reopening old scars. "She won't stop," Volcom said heavily, voicing the thought on both their minds. "Not while hope remains." Bolt clasped his shoulder. "Then we must keep hope alive and trust in her redemption, no matter how dark the path grows. Volcom managed a faint smile. You always were the optimist between us. He drew himself up with effort. But Shadow Stalker can wait. We must stop Obsidian Hand's true plan before it's too late. Bolt nodded. Together they could shed light on the darkness ahead, no matter its source. Chapter 13. Are you absolutely certain, Volcom? Bolt asked intently. The older hero nodded. I helped design the Annihilator's power core myself under Obsidian Hand's coercion. I know its weaknesses inside and out. They stood gathered in Megavolt's lair after regrouping from the ambush. Bolt had insisted Volcom give them any insight into Obsidian Hand's endgame, especially this mysterious superweapon, the Annihilator. Volcom gripped his cane tightly. They forced me to use my knowledge of energy systems to help them build it. The Annihilator can allegedly channel enough raw power to level entire cities. He shook his head bitterly. I couldn't refuse at first, not with my granddaughter Sparks held hostage. Megavolt put a supportive hand on his shoulder. That wasn't your fault, but now we can make it right. Just tell us where to hit this Annihilator thing. The central reactor, Volcom said without hesitation. Sever the power feed to that, and the entire system will overload permanently. Bolt crossed his arms thoughtfully. Can we be certain Obsidian Hand won't simply repair it after we leave? No, Volcom conceded. Taking out the reactor will only buy time to truly stop the Annihilator. He took a deep breath. We'll have to destroy the clone. Megavolt looked between them in confusion. Clone? What clone? Volcom turned to her gravely. The Annihilator's true power source isn't technology, it's a living energy capacitor. A clone of Annihilus, ruler of the negative zone. It provides the raw power that the reactor focalizes into a weapon. Bolt's face was grim. I take it this clone is no innocent captive. No. Volcom's expression was bleak. The researchers in charge of its education ensured the clone is a merciless reflection of its progenitor. Given the chance, either would doom this world without hesitation. Heavy silence fell over the trio. Megavolt was the first to break it. So we take them both out, hit the clone and the reactor simultaneously to shut down the Annihilator permanently. She smacked a fist into her palm, electricity cackling. Easy. Not so simple as that, Bolt cautioned. Obsidian Hand will be on high alert now, and Annihilus will not let his clone fall without a fight. We'll just hit him hard and fast. Megavolt insisted. Between my powers, Volcom's insider knowledge, and your sneaky ninja stuff, Bolt, we can do this. Bolt had to smile at her enthusiasm. Perhaps you're right. He turned to Volcom. Are you up for this, my friend? The older hero drew himself up straight. Absolutely, it's time I atoned for my role in this, and rescued my granddaughter. Bolt clasped Volcom's shoulder firmly. Then he turned to Megavolt. Gather your allies, we'll need everyone's abilities to pull this off. Megavolt grinned. You got it, boss. She raced off to rally support. Alone now, Bolt met Volcom's gaze. When this is done, promise me you'll try to reach out to Shadow Stalker again. She's not lost yet. Volcom just sadly shook his head. That path closed long ago, but the least I can do now is ensure Obsidian Hand harms no one else. He managed a faint smile. And try to keep that reckless partner of yours alive. Bolt returned the smile as they clasped arms. Then together they turned to prepare for the coming storm. Chapter 14. Alarms blared deafeningly as Megavolt raced through the Annihilator complex, Bolt and Volcom on her heels. Obsidian Hand certainly knew they were here now. You sure the clone chamber is through here? Megavolt yelled over the din. Warren forces appeared ahead, unleashing a hail of dark energy pulses. Positive. Volcom deflected a shot with an energy shield. I memorized the layout during my work here. Then leave these grunts to me, Megavolt declared, hands lighting up. You two smash that clone. Bolt and Volcom raced on as Megavolt unleashed a blinding cascade of electricity, scattering their pursuers. But more would come. They had to hurry. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of massive reinforced doors. The twin conduits feeding energy pulsed ominously along the walls. The reactor chamber lies just beyond, Volcom confirmed. Overloading it should destabilize the entire Annihilator system. Let's find out. Drawing on his Kai, Bolt struck the doors precisely where Volcom indicated structural weak points were. They buckled under the focused blows and collapsed inward. The reactor towered within the vast chamber, energy swirling violently through its containment fields. Gantries and platforms surrounded it, all abandoned when the alarms triggered. Bolt spotted the main control hub and raced toward it. Volcom moved to follow, but stumbled as a shadowy tendril suddenly speared forth, missing him by inches. Did you truly think I would let you threaten my charge so easily, old fool? Shadow Stalker emerged from the darkness, hands trailing inky blackness. Volcom's gaze hardened as he turned to face her. Stand aside, Phyla. My business is with the Annihilator, not you. Oh, Volcom. Shadow Stalker shook her head. You were always blind to what truly mattered. More shadows gathered around her menacingly. But no more. As the Dark Enforcer attacked, Volcom countered with blasts of electricity. Go, Bolt, destroy the reactor controls and this. Bolt hesitated, but an urgent gesture from Volcom sent him racing onward. His friend could handle himself. The mission came first. Bolt leapt up onto the reactor hub's central platform. But before he could access the controls, a thunderous explosion knocked him back. Standing before the panel was a hulking figure encased in scorched and dented battle armor. Overload. Bolt slid into a fighting stance. I don't wish to fight you, my friend. Stand aside. The villain aimed his cannons at Bolt. Can't let you fry my investment here. Hero Obsidian Hand has plans for this weapon, and I want in. He unleashed a salvo that Bolt nimbly dodged. Don't do this. Bolt pleaded, moving in closer. You're better than this corruption. Overload laughed harshly. You don't know me at all, now burn, hero. His cannons charged up to fire again, but suddenly powered down. Overload staggered back with a grunt as Megavolt dropped onto the platform behind him. Sorry, scrap heap, but only bolts getting fried today are yours. She slammed Overload with another electrical burst before he could recover. The armored villain collapsed, immobilized. Bolt nodded his thanks before turning to interface with the reactor controls. But the battle was far from over. Chapter 15. Megavolt stood guard over the disabled overload while Bolt frantically worked the reactor controls. But every sequence he tried failed to initiate overload. A dark laughter echoed from below. Did you truly think it would be so simple? Shadow Stalker melted from the shadows, leaving Volcom bound behind her. The reactor's energy flow stabilized as she approached the platform. The Annihilator answers only to Obsidian Hand now. Her hand caressed the containment field possessively. With but a thought, I can command it to unleash devastation. Bolt glanced at the controls in frustration. Hacking the system was beyond him. But Shadow Stalker clearly had a deeper connection to the weapon. He stepped forward intently. Phyla, listen to me. You know in your heart this is wrong. Annihilus is just using you. He extended a hand. Shut down the reactor and let us help you. For a moment, Shadow Stalker hesitated, shadows flickering uncertainly around her. But then her eyes hardened. No, Lord Annihilus shall usher in a new epoch. If the old world must burn for that vision, so be it. She raised her hands to finally unleash the Annihilator, but Megavolt blindsided her with a massive electric surge. Shadow Stalker went down hard. Yeah, how about no apocalypse today? Megavolt moved to finish her, but Bolt grabbed her arm. No, she is not beyond redemption. He held Megavolt's gaze. As I once wasn't, heroes don't kill. Megavolt scowled, but finally powered down her fists. Fine, but how do we shut this thing down then? Bolt regarded the pulsating reactor. They couldn't destroy it without endangering the city. And if Shadow Stalker could control it through her connection. Inspiration struck. Overload. Can you interface remotely with the reactor? The villain grunted, still paralyzed on the platform. Of course, but why should I help? Because you wish to prove you're more than just a living weapon. Bolt's words gave Overload pause. Here is your chance. Help us safely discharge the Annihilator's power. For long moments, Overload was silent. Finally, his hands shifted into data ports, which snaked to the console. This goes against my wiring, but you've made your point, Bolt. As he worked, Shadow Stalker stirred with a groan. When she saw Overload hacking the reactor, shadows swirled furiously around her. No, the Annihilator will bring order. She rose unsteadily, but Bolt interposed himself. No more Phyla, he said firmly, yet not without empathy. Help us end this safely. Shadow Stalker hesitated once more, eyes conflicted. But finally, the shadows ebbed from her hands. Very well, the remote recall protocols can drain the excess energy. Bolt clasped her shoulder, seeing the hero she had once been. Thank you, my friend. Together they joined Overload at the controls, Megavolt watching cautiously nearby. But elsewhere, ominous forces gathered, sensing the Annihilator's power threaten. Chapter 16. Recall protocols initiated, Shadow Stalker reported. The Annihilator will discharge its full energy buildup into storage cores. Bolt checked the reactor readings. Energy levels were already decreasing as Overload channeled the power away into remote batteries. Good work. Once it's fully drained, this threat will be finished. But even as he said it, an alarm blared. The containment field shuddered, energy fluctuating erratically. What's happening? Megavolt demanded. Shadow Stalker's fists clenched. Annihilus, he must sense the Annihilator power threatened. We have to finish before he intervenes. She entered commands rapidly. Overload worked just as frantically to speed the transfer. But the energy flow only grew more chaotic. Warning klaxons blared deafeningly as dangerous power spikes threatened to rupture the entire reactor. Suddenly the doors burst open. The Annihilator clone strode in, skin crackling with red energy tendrils. Blood trickled from its eyes and mouth. "Lord Annihilus compels me," the clone intoned hollowly. "I must restore what is his." Dark power lashed toward them, but Shadow Stalker intercepted it with a shield of swirling night. "Delay the abomination. I will stabilize the reactor." Bolt and Megavolt struck first, hammering the clone with blows and electricity, trying to keep it off balance. But their attacks barely slowed the creature as its master channeled more power into it. Overload stepped forward, cannons raised. "Let's see how you handle a real Overload clone." Twin energy beams slammed into the creature with enough force to shatter concrete. It staggered back with an unearthly scream, just as the containment field finally failed. Blinding energy erupted outward. Bolt shielded his eyes, bracing for the end. But the detonation he expected never came. Cautiously, he lowered his arm. The crimson energy swirled lazily now, flowing into storage units Shadow Stalker had deployed. She gave Overload an approving look. "Well done. The Annihilator's power is contained." The smoldering clone lay unmoving amid the wreckage. Megavolt nudged it with her foot, electricity still dancing warningly over her fists. "So, we done here?" Bolt placed a calming hand on her shoulder as Shadow Stalker released the bound Volcom. "Yes, it's over at last." He clasped Shadow Stalker's hand. "Thank you, Phyla." She managed a thin smile in return. "I should be the one thanking you for reminding me the light still exists, if we but look for it." Their work here was done. But Bolt knew Shadow Stalker still had her own redemption to seek, as did any who embraced darkness thinking it their only refuge. But for now, the Annihilator was no more. And though challenges remained, there was hope again in Neo Metropolis. Chapter 17. Obsidian Hand's inner sanctum rumbled furiously as its shadowy denizens debated this latest failure. Impossible, the Annihilator was supposed to be invincible. Clearly, placing trust in Volcom was an error. From the viewing orb, Annihilus' fiery gaze fell upon the assembly. "Fools, your lack of vision has led us to this point." The lead council members swept into a deep bow. "My deepest apologies, Lord Annihil." "No more excuses." Annihilus thundered, his demonic visage contorting in rage. "I placed command of this operation in your hands, and you have failed me." The lead council member trembled, head still low. "We only wished to be cautious. The weapon was not ready. If we had just waited." "Waited?" Annihilus hissed. "While those wretched heroes grow stronger, while doubt takes root within our own ranks." His gaze burned with fiery intensity. "No, the time has come to take matters into my own hands." He extended a claw, energy crackling around it. Before anyone could react, bolts of power lashed out, reducing each council member to ash within seconds. Only the lead council member remained cowering before the viewing orb. "Please," My lord, show mercy. The phantom's eyes narrowed. Mercy? Did you show mercy when you murdered those who discovered your secret? With another burst, the lead council member met the same fate as the others. Annihilus observed the smoldering pile impassively. None can be allowed to threaten the plan. Turning from the carnage, he passed a hand over the orb's surface. Its glassy texture rippled, and Annihilus began to emerge, taking physical form for the first time in years. He flexed his claws experimentally. Being confined as pure energy had strengthened him, but it was good to inhabit flesh once more. Soon, not just his hand but his full being would pass through the veil permanently. Then none would dare oppose him again. But first, those meddling heroes had to be eliminated. Annihilus flung out a hand, ripping open a portal. Beyond it lay the same chamber, empty now save for the scorch marks. With a contemptuous sneer, Annihilus stepped through and into a blazing electrical cage. He recoiled with an enraged scream as Megavolt dropped down from where she had been hidden, pouring on more power. Surprise, we figured you'd show up to check on things. She grinned fiercely. Light's Dawn sends their regards. The cage sizzled as Annihilus channeled chaotic energies to rip free. But before he could, Bolt dropped soundlessly behind him, striking precision nerve points to disrupt the creature's focus. The cage died instantly as Shadow Stalker rose from the late council member's remains. Back to your hell, monster. Her hand stretched out, shadows flowing forth to tear open a singularity right beneath Annihilus' feet. Howling furiously, the warlord sank into its depths before he could summon his power. As the portal sealed shut once more, Volcom stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. Well done, Phyla. I'm proud of you. She managed a thin smile. Now I can finally atone, once this pretender is banished for good. Together, they turned to the silent orb. Annihilus in-game had been revealed and thwarted. But Light's Dawn knew their fight wasn't over yet. Not until true justice dawned. Chapter 18. Are you certain this will banish Annihilus permanently? Bolt asked. Volcom nodded, making adjustments to the reactor apparatus. By reversing the containment flow into the orb, we can use its own dimensional energies against him. Megavolt cracked her knuckles, electricity dancing in anticipation. Sounds good to me, let's fry this creep. She moved to activate the machine, but Bolt gently lowered her hand. A moment, there is still one thing we must try first. He turned to Shadow Stalker, who stood silently nearby. Phyla, speak with him, make him understand why this path is wrong. Perhaps he can still be saved. Her brow furrowed. Annihilus is beyond reason, you know this. No one is beyond redemption, not completely. Bolt held her gaze. Once, you would have said the same of me in my darkest moments, but I found my way back. He squeezed her shoulder. Have hope. For a long moment, Shadow Stalker was silent. But finally, she nodded. Very well, I will try to reach him, for the sake of who he once was. Taking a deep breath, Shadow Stalker opened a portal into the orb with an incantation. The glassy surface rippled, and she stepped through into its unknown depths. Inside, the realm's chaotic energies buffeted Shadow Stalker mercilessly. But her own darkness protected her as she delved deeper. Finally, she found Annihilus floating in an endless void. Sensing her presence, he whirled with a snarl, power flaring. I shall finish what I began. No, I'm here to talk. Shadow Stalker dispelled the raging tempest with a thought. Please, listen to reason. This path of destruction is misguided. Annihilus paused, fiery eyes narrowed. Misguided, I seek only to end the chaos that consumes all dimensions. Through more chaos and suffering? Shadow Stalker shook her head sadly. I walked in darkness, long as you have. It blinded me to truth. She extended a hand. But now I see we all share responsibility for the welfare of others. Through mercy and compassion, we can heal this broken multiverse. For a moment, Annihilus was silent. But then he slapped her hand away. Foolish notions, I reject this weakness. His glow intensified. All shall kneel before my vision's order or be destroyed. He unleashed a tremendous blast of power. Shadow Stalker crossed her arms, barely weathering the assault. As the churning energies raged around her, she sighed heavily. Then I am sorry, old friend, but we must end this threat, for the good of all. Steeling herself, Shadow Stalker invoked words of banishing, seeking to bind Annihilus fully within the orb. He struggled violently, but without the clone to channel power through, his etheric form alone could not resist the spell. You have failed, betrayer. Annihilus raged as he slowly dissolved into the orb. I am eternal. You cannot contain me for. His tirade was cut short as he finally vanished fully, sealed away. Shadow Stalker lowered her arms with a weary sigh. She had hoped redemption could reach even one as twisted by hatred as Annihilus. But in the end, sometimes all you could do was stop the spread of darkness. With heavy steps, she turned to exit the orb and inform the others it was done. Annihilus would threaten life no more. Chapter 19. Annihilus has been bound fully within the orb, Shadow Stalker reported. He will not trouble anyone again. Bolt clasped her shoulder. I know that was difficult, but it was necessary. Megavolt stretched with a satisfied grin. So we're all good now. Obsidian Hand is done, and the Annihilator kaput. I'd call that a win. If only it were that simple. Shadow Stalker regarded the pulsing orb grimly. Now that Annihilus has been cut off from it, the orb's dimensional energies are becoming dangerously unstable. Faint wisps of crimson power leaked from cracked sections in the glassy surface. The entire apparatus shook ominously. Alarms blared as Volcom examined readings. She's right. Major energy spike building. At this rate, it'll rupture within the hour. Megavolt waved a dismissive hand. PFFD will just vent it off like before into some storage batteries. But Shadow Stalker shook her head. You don't understand. Annihilus was the only thing regulating these chaotic forces within the orb. Without him, the entropy will soon be uncontainable. Bolt's brow furrowed in concern. You're saying it could explode? Far worse. Shadow Stalker's expression was grim. The orb contains enough dimensional energy to destabilize our very reality. All of Neo Metropolis would be swallowed into the ensuing vortex. That's definitely worse. Megavolt glanced nervously at the growing fissures. So what do we do to stop this universe-killing kablooey? Volcom rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We may be able to siphon the excess power harmlessly using Shadow Stalker's portal magic, but we'd need an anchor point to channel it into some non-adjacent reality. The nexus of all realities, Bolt exclaimed. Its metaphysical structure could safely disperse the entropy. Shadow Stalker nodded. Yes, that may just work, but the nexus lies outside the normal multiverse, reaching it, even through my portals. Leave that to me. They turned as Overload thudded in, armor scorched, but operational. He cracked his massive knuckles. You need tech that can pierce dimensional barriers? I've got just the cannons for that. Bolt nodded. Thank you, my friend. He turned to the others. Let's begin immediately. Time is against us. As the orb fractures deepen, leaking more unstable energy, the unlikely team prepared their reality-saving plan. Bolt only hoped they could breach the Nexus before Neo Metropolis paid the price. Chapter 20. The unstable orb shook violently atop its pedestal, fractures widening across its surface as deadly dimensional energy built toward a catastrophic meltdown. But the newly allied team raced desperately to prevent that chaotic outcome. Emergency siphon ready, Volcom called, attaching cables from the makeshift device into cracks along the orb. Shadow Stalker, on you. The Dark Enforcer stood ready, hands flowing with inky shadows. Opening microportals to begin extraction. Just be prepared for what comes through. With an eldritch incantation, tiny rifts opened across the orb's surface, siphoning the raging power within. But not all that spilled out was pure energy. A clawed appendage burst through one portal, swiping at Megavolt. Whoa, I thought we ditched the Annihilator's uglies. She blasted the limb back through with a bolt. Annihilus banishment has weakened the dimensional barriers, Shadow Stalker grit out, maintaining her focus. Creatures from the other realms are slipping through. Indeed, more monstrous appendages thrashed through the microportals, along with amorphous slime and flickering shapes. Overload and Bolt battled them back, while Volcom and Megavolt fought to contain the escaping entropy. We must stabilize the orb's matrix directly, Volcom said over the chaos. He grabbed a containment suit. I'm going in. What? No way. Megavolt protested. But Volcom was already sealing the protective garment. I helped design the confounded thing. I can restructure its power grid to buy us time. Before Megavolt could argue further, he activated the orb interface and vanished inside. She cursed under her breath. These hero types always rushing into danger. A hulking crab-like horror managed to fully tear through its rift. Megavolt blasted it aside and dove in after Volcom. Someone had to pull his reckless butt out. Inside the orb, chaotic energies raged, blurring Megavolt's senses. But she doggedly pushed through the metaphysical turbulence until she found Volcom struggling to maintain shields against the entropy storm. What are you doing here? He yelled. Get out before you're torn apart. Megavolt grit her teeth, reinforcing his shields with her own electrical aura. Not without you, old-timer. Together they fought through the maelstrom and managed to initiate a power grid reset sequence. The space around them stabilized briefly, entropy striations smoothing out. There, that should buy us some. Volcom blinked. Wait, where's my cane? Before Megavolt could respond, the shield grid failed. Savage winds ripped Volcom away into the chaos. No. Megavolt dove after him. If she lost him in this, the old hero would never make it out. Blindly, crashing through raging eddies and whirlpools of power, Megavolt finally tackled Volcom and curled her aura around them. Outside, she knew the others battled on, as the orb's meltdown loomed. Chapter 21. Megavolt clung to Volcoms protectively as metaphysical turbulence threatened to tear them apart within the raging orb. But she knew their friends battled on without outside. They had to escape now, before the meltdown destroyed everything. "Hang on," she shouted over the chaos. Focusing her power, Megavolt let her electrical aura expand into a makeshift shield against the entropy winds, then rocketed them both toward the flickering exit point ahead. With a final burst, they crashed back into the physical world and tumbled to the floor. The orb shook ever more violently above them, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface as deadly energy built. Bolt helped them both up. "Did you stabilize it?" Volcom shook his head wearily. "A temporary grid reset only. This thing's still going critical." "Then it's time to pierce a portal into the Nexus." Bolt turned to Overload, who aimed his cannons at a shimmering rift Shadow Stalker, was struggling to maintain against the escaping dimensional forces. Barrier penetration online, the villain rumbled. His cannons glowed with power. "Stand back, this blast will." A segmented tendril whipped through the rift suddenly, lashing around Overload. More appendages followed, dragging the heavy villain toward the portal before he could fire. "No, Overload." Bolt managed to sever one tendril with an energized punch, but too late. Overload's massive form vanished into the rift between realities, his angry bellows cut short as it sealed again. For a moment, the team stood stunned. But there was no time for despair. The orb was nearly melted down completely now. Only Scheme Stalker's fading rift offered escape. Bolt turned to Megavolt, expression grave. "You have the most raw power. Can you focus it to pierce the Nexus?" She hesitated. I can try, but..." "We believe in you," Volcom said, squeezing her shoulder. "Your spirit shines bright enough to pierce any barrier if you give it your all." Megavolt swallowed down her doubts and stepped up beside Shadow Stalker. This was truly a last-ditch effort, but she had to try and live up to the faith her friends placed in her. "Hit it with everything you've got," Bolt shouted. Hands crackling, Megavolt unleashed the strongest electrical blast she could muster directly into the collapsing rift. Reality itself seemed to buckle under the power surge. For a moment, Megavolt swore she glimpsed a serene emerald realm on the other side. But just as it peaked, the rift evaporated completely. The orb shook with a bone-rattling peal, a single massive fracture slicing across its width. Megavolt collapsed to her knees, utterly spent. She'd failed. A heavy hand clasped her shoulder. "Wait," rumbled Overload. Somehow, he had reemerged. His armor was battered and smoking, but functional enough for him to brace against the widening orb of fissure with his massive cannons. "You pierced it just enough," he said. "One good blast will finish the job." Mustering the last of his power, Overload fired a devastating beam directly into the crack. Reality parted around it, and snapped back together stronger than ever. The orb split cleanly in half, power dissipating harmlessly. As the dust settled, Bolt helped a shaky Megavolt to her feet again. "You did it. Your spirit shone bright enough to save us all." Looking around, Megavolt saw Shadow Stalker and Volcom leaning wearily on each other, but nodding in proud agreement. Maybe she had what it took to be a true hero after all. But only because her friends never lost faith she could find the light within. Chapter 22. Megavolt gazed out across Neo Metropolis skyline as the city gradually returned to normality after Obsidian Hand's defeat. Repair crews were still clearing rubble and wreckage, but citizens took to the streets again without fear. All thanks to their efforts. "We did good, rookie." She turned to see Bolt step up beside her, also looking out over the recovering city. The older hero smiled. "Who you calling rookie?" Megavolt nudged him playfully. "I'm the hero who saved all reality, remember?" "Yes, with a bit of help." Bolt's expression grew serious. "But Annihilus and his ilk will always lurk out there. Evil doesn't retire." Megavolt nodded. "And we'll be here, shining light on their shadows." She smirked. "Or I will be, while you enjoy a well-earned rest." Bolt chuckled. This old dog still has some bite left, but the next generation needs to take up the burden. He clasped her shoulder. "I know you'll guide them well when I'm gone." "Hey, don't go getting sappy on me," Megavolt protested, though she couldn't help feeling touched at the sentiment. Maybe she had been too quick to dismiss Bolt's experience and wisdom early on. Together, they looked out over Neo Metropolis as it came back to life. Other heroes, new and old, were also out there. Former villains, too. All finally united by higher purpose. Megavolt knew the future would inevitably bring fresh threats. But united by hope instead of fear, she had faith they would overcome whatever loomed ahead. "So, think Shadow Stalker will drop in on that little celebratory shindig later," she mused. Bolt smiled knowingly. "Oh, I suspect we'll be seeing her light shine again before long." Megavolt had to agree. They had planted seeds of redemption not just here, but across dimensions. All any hero could do was kindle that spark so others could carry the flame. Bolt suddenly tossed her an object, Volcom's old cane, recovered finally from the orb's chaotic depths. A memento and symbol of sorts passing the torch. Megavolt grinned, electricity dancing down the cane. She would carry it proudly. Together, the two heroes looked out over the city they loved, spirits igniting the way forward toward a brighter future. The end.